Welcome to Presume Technologies. I am Venkat. This is part 15 of ASP.NET MVC tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss update model function in MVC. Please watch part 14 before proceeding with this video. Let's quickly recap what we discussed in part 14. Now, if I submit this form by clicking on this create button, this form data will be posted to the server. And then these parameters of this create controller action method are going to receive the posted form data. Instead of passing these individual properties of the employee object as parameters to this create controller action method, I can actually pass the entire employee object as a parameter. So this employee object is actually going to receive the posted form data now. And then, since we are passing the employee object here, we can get rid of this code right here. Okay? And then notice that we are handing that employee object to the add employee method, which will add that employee to the database table, and then we are redirecting the user to the index action, which is going to list all the employees that are present in TBL employee table. Now, one more thing that I'm going to do here is check if there are any model validation errors, and to do that I can make use of isValid property of model state object. So this property is a Boolean property, meaning it's going to return a true or a false. It's going to return true if there are no model validation errors. On the other hand, if there are validation errors, it's going to return false. If it returns false, then we want to provide the user an opportunity to correct those errors and submit the form. So we should make the user retain on the same view. And to do that, I'm going to simply return a view. So which view will this return? This will return create view. Okay, that is the same view. So the user can correct those errors and then submit the form. On the other hand, look at this. If this property returns true, isValid property, if that returns true, then we are passing the employee object to add employee, and we redirect the user to the index action. So this line will never get executed. Only if there are model validation errors, this line gets executed. It returns the create view, meaning the same view, so the user can correct those errors and submit the form. Alright, we'll discuss more about model validation errors in a later video session. Now, we can achieve this. Actually, let's run this and see if it works as expected. Now, if you look at the database table at the moment, let's execute this and see we only have 5 rows at the moment. So let's actually navigate to create action of the employee controller. Let's fill some data. Let's submit this form. Notice that the employee is added as expected. Let's quickly check the database table. So we have that new row there. Alright, now we can achieve the same thing without even passing any parameter to our controller action method. So I'm going to get rid of this parameter right here, and then inside this function I'm going to create a new employee object. So let's call it employee, and then I'm going to use this update model function and then pass that employee object to this update model function. Okay, so what's happening here? We are creating a new employee object. So obviously at this point all the properties of the employee object will be null. Okay, because that's a new object. And then once this line is executed, what's going to happen, whatever data that we post, that will be binded with this employee object. That's what is the purpose of this update employee function. And then this employee object, the same process, passed to add employee, and then we are redirecting to the index action. Okay, but then look at this. Notice these two controller action methods here. Okay, this is the controller action method which responds to HTTP GET, whereas this one responds to HTTP POST. But then look at this. If you look at these two methods, they don't have any parameters at all, but they have the same name. So obviously, if we want to overload methods, they have to differ either by the type or number of parameters. But these functions, they don't have, parameters at all. So obviously, when we build this project, we get a compilation error. Notice that this employee controller already defines a member called create with same parameter types. Okay, so how to fix this error? Obviously, one way to fix this error is to rename that. So I'm going to rename that to create_post, because we want this controller action method to respond to a post operation. Okay, now the moment I do that, this controller action method will no longer respond to the post action. When we post this form, this controller action method is not going to respond. So how do we fix that? By using something called action name attribute. So action name, and I want this controller, look at this, this can be any name, but then since I'm using my action name here, I can specify the action for which I want this controller action method to respond. Okay, so I want this to respond to this URL when I post the form, because we decorated this controller action method with the HTTP post and the action name is create. Now, just for consistency's sake, I'm going to rename this to get. Okay, and if you want this controller action method to respond to the get request of this URL, then you have to specify the action name as create again. So let's copy this and move it right there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run this and see if it works as expected. So let's navigate to employee controller, create action. Let's fill the form with some sample data. Let's actually change it to something else. Look at that, the row is added. Okay, though our controller action method names, the actual names are different, since I'm using action name attribute here, these controller action methods are going to respond to that URL right there, depending on whether if it's a get or a post request. So instead of passing the individual properties, we have seen how to pass the employee object itself as a parameter to this create controller action method. And then instead of passing any parameter to the employee object, we actually created an employee object, and then we used this update model function, which is going to bind the posted form data with that object. And then we are passing that object to add employee method, and we finally redirect the user to the index action. So what is this update model function going to do? It's going to inspect all the HTTP request inputs, such as the posted form data, query strings, cookies and server variables, and populate our employee object. So that's the purpose of this update model. Actually, in MVC we have another function called try update model. In our next video we'll discuss with examples the difference between update model and try update model. And then one more important thing to keep in mind, we didn't get any errors now when we run this application, but you may get an intermittent error stating that adding the specified count to the semaphore would cause it to exceed its maximum count. So if you get this error, there are two ways to resolve it: either restart IIS or disable connection pooling in the connection string of your web.config file. On this slide you can find resources for ASP.NET, C# and SQL Server interview questions. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.